Hi everyone, it's Margot. We'll just give everybody a few more minutes to settle in. There's still some people coming in. While people are settling in, just a quick orientation for those that may not be familiar with Teams live events. Up in the top right-hand corner, assuming you're using a PC, not a Mac, you'll find comment bubbles that if you hover over is show Q&A. That's your way to communicate with us, and we encourage you to put as many questions as you can in there, and we'll be moderating that conversation at the end. It's also a great place to share contact information and names, so if you could pop your name in there, then I know who's on the call. And we will get started momentarily. There's still a few people popping in. So maybe while people are still coming into the session, just take this opportunity to thank Ilana for being with us here today. I first saw Ilana speak at a Recast Your City presentation through Rural Sparks, which is a organization out of Texas that focuses on rural development. And she really caught my eye because there was a number of things that she spoke about in there that had been themes of conversations I'd been having with some of you on the call, others that are in economic development in Manitoba. And so I knew right away that there was something to her approach that was already resonating within the Manitoba environment, whether we realized that that was the case or not. So I had the great pleasure not only of having several conversations with Ilana, but also reading her book, some of which we will be giving away at the end of the event. And so if you are not comfortable with us posting your name on social media for some reason, please fire us a note before 3 o'clock because we will be making the draw for the books and publishing the name of all of the winners at that point in time. And we want to make sure that we're not publishing your name if you're not comfortable with that. So just fire us an email if you're registered and you're not comfortable with your name being published. I've also had the great pleasure of reading her book. It's full of sticky notes and lots of comments, and that is fabulous because it means it sparked lots of thinking and ideas and identification of opportunities and things that I think we can use here in Manitoba. I had a great deal of difficulty getting her book. It was actually sold out in a lot of places. So I was, it took me a while to go from that initial presentation that I was at and conversations with Ilana to actually being able to finish her book. So I highly recommend it. It is an easy read, but jam-packed full of information. So with that, here's the book. Promise you, there's lots of sticky notes. You're in for a lot of great information. Please make sure that you put information and questions into the Q&A so that we're able to come back to them at the end of the discussion. And with that, I will turn this over to Ilana.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Margot, for having me here. Always delays in figuring out where I click to get off of mute, but I'm really excited to be here today and to join everybody for this conversation. And I really do hope it's a conversation. As Margot said, please at any point put your questions into the question box and we'll, as we can at the end. But what I want to take you through is a little bit of a story today and really talk about, you know, what does it mean to be in a community? What does it mean to lead a community like you guys lead? And just by starting by saying hello, I'm dialing in from the United States. I'm really excited to not only be able to connect with you guys in Canada, but also really bring my passion about this work with small towns and small cities to the work that you're doing. Because I think that to say that we've all been through a lot in the last year and a half is really an understatement. And the reality is that it has so much to do, the way we come out of this has so much to do with how we think about that as a recovery and what does that have to do with our downtowns and main streets. I've always been passionate about downtowns because to me, it's really these are the places that are the personality of our places. The small businesses that really show who we are and the personalities of the business owners there, but they also, in many cases, show the neglect, right? The historic exclusion of places and people in our communities and the problems we've created through that. And the focus that I always have, and I came at this from a really roundabout perspective because my original training is in city planning. So I was all numbers and maps, all analyst. But really when it comes down to thinking about the places that we live, it's really to me about having a place that has heart. And really thinking about what does it mean as a small town or as a small city to create a place that has heart where people come together. When I ask people in small communities, what do they want in their downtown? Almost inevitably, we end up in the conversation of a place that we can stroll, we can run into our neighbors, we can see people in our community walk into their business and really be proud of this place. And so it's also really painful to me to sometimes see that even for all of those aspirations and all those goals, we have these vacancies, and the pandemic has only made it worse in a lot of places around the world. Just a little bit about myself. As I said, I started in all of this in city planning. I come at this from the perspective, like I said, of how do we make great places, but it's all from this perspective of bringing people together through small scale manufacturing businesses. And I'm going to tell you a lot more about them later, but it's any business that's making some kind of tangible good that you can package or replicate, and how those businesses really fit into the fabric of our downtowns and into our storefronts. And bringing the community together around that, bringing business owners together, and bringing local leaders like yourselves around that, because it's not just about talking about it, it's about implementing it. Just a little bit about my background. On the left, you can see a picture of me, this amazing, honest to goodness, electric blue dress that my mother sewed for me when I was in high school. She knit, she sewed, she painted, she taught us all how to use a drill, measure 3 times, cut once kind of thing. And then on the right, you can see when I had the opportunity to give a TEDx talk about the economic power of great places, which really has always been my passion. My other passion are these crazy teens, only one of which still lives in my house, and getting to teach them how to use drills and create things and really believe not only in themselves, but in the places that they live. And I think it's really important to sort of center ourselves without being too much in the doldrums about this in the struggle that we're in today, and that it's not just what we're experiencing today, but that when we look back, in many cases, our economic development actions have excluded some people in some places. And I think in many ways, it's very different, but some interesting commonalities between the United States and Canada on this, particularly when we look at rural cities and towns, and how they haven't benefited from a lot of things that some of the bigger cities have benefited from. And that's true of the diversity of the population as well. And the question then is, what do we do about it now? And so just to talk a little bit about this default model that may not be what you guys do in your communities, but is really sort of the default of where economic development practice has been for a long time. And it's really a big problem. And we need to think about how we're doing things differently and investing in a better way. So this default model really has 3 major problems in it that really sort of tear it at my insides, to tell you the truth. Assuming that this is a one-size-fits-all model, and that whatever worked in one place is going to work in another. And it's really a problem. As much as I loved 80s hairbands, our economic development strategy, for the most part, is stuck in the 80s, or in fact the 70s, right? It's all about chasing a big business to open up some kind of jobs, and then the sell of, oh, it's going to have all these indirect job creation that comes with it. Well, in fact, when we talk about indirect job creation, for the most part, those are really low-wage jobs, service and retail jobs. And most places aren't going to win the competition for one big business to solve all the woes. And then communities throw money at this recruitment instead of investing it in their own people. And in a lot of places, the incentives are only for high income jobs, and those businesses are in fact bringing like 70% of the employees with them, and not creating more jobs in the community. On top of that, we have this challenge that a lot of people in places were left behind where industry used to be, and nobody has figured out yet how to reinvest in those places. And then this wonderful thing called venture capital, but that really in both countries sort of consolidates in a few places. Toronto and Vancouver get over 75% of all of the venture capital this year, invested so far this year in Canada. And that means that any other part of the country that's trying to grow any kind of tech business is going to be fighting for very small amounts of investment. And that tech and venture capital are not the only way to grow the investments in a community, to grow businesses within a community. And then there's racial income divides. In Canada, you refer to the different groups as visible minorities, which was a new phrase for me as I was looking at this. But that there is research showing that visible minorities really have about 1/3 less wealth as compared to white households. And that's across Canada. And that we have across the board this challenge that it's not just about unequal income opportunity today, which is true, but it's also about wealth creation and investments. And that creates even more of a division within communities. And then we have this problem. You may not have this in your town, but this is true of real estate sort of broadly. When real estate developers figure out how to build a thing, they like to just build that thing, the widget that they figured out. And it becomes this vanilla of new construction that you have no idea where you are. And the truth is that the juice or the coffee or the whatever it is, it could be anywhere. And then you have no competitive edge for being different. It's very easy to be replaced by the next town down the street. And in a lot of places, US is definitely worse than Canada on this, but Canada is bad at this too. We've sort of retail like this really expensive peanut butter. There's so much retail in most parts of the country that there's just too much of it. And at the same time, we've seen a lot of national consolidate their footprint and only go to prime locations. And so we have lots and lots of vacancies from retail that were happening even before this. Now, some statistics that are US based, but I'm going to bet that this is pretty similar in Canada, is that we're seeing a huge number of counties are seeing a decline in working age adult population. That's partially from brain drain, the youth leaving town. That's partially because of an aging of a population, but it really impacts the local economy and the opportunities. And then in the US, we're also seeing this enormous income inequality. This is the highest difference between the people making the least and the people making the most that we've ever recorded in the US. And obviously that's a US specific challenge, but it impacts communities in all sorts of ways. And then this sort of universal piece, which is about vacant properties, which you might be experiencing, where when we have property owners that are just sitting, I call them squatters really, that are sitting on vacant commercial properties, they're depressing the property values of everything else around it, let alone sales revenue and things like that. And that really becomes a major problem, major barrier in a lot of small cities and towns. And on top of that, we have this retail vacancy rise because not only of the consolidation of retail before the pandemic, but so many small businesses closed. In the US, we've had, in fact, twice as many Black businesses have Black-owned businesses closed than white-owned businesses, but the impacts are still being felt. And around here, I'm based in Washington, D.C., and talking to folks across the country, a lot of businesses made it through last year because of different kinds of emergency funding, and they're struggling right now. A lot of them are really threatened and feeling like they're going to go under at this point. And then we have this urban-rural divide in Canada also in terms of unemployment, and that the unemployment rate was getting better, but that obviously the pandemic has really impacted that in an enormous way. And I don't know what it looks like for 2021, but the unemployment and underemployment, low-wage jobs versus middle-income jobs, becomes a real challenge to bringing downtowns back to life. So what does all of this have to do with downtowns and economic recovery? I think it's important to think about what this means for our communities, and that we are at this transformational moment, right? And that gives me hope because there are these things called small scale manufacturing businesses that are completely different from the way we have spent our time looking at both economic development and storefront use in the past. So I'm gonna illustrate my point by telling you about a couple different businesses that I know. This is CEO Ceramics. CEO Ceramics makes, oh, I'm not wearing her earrings today. I try to wear her earrings. She makes wonderful ceramic jewelry. I met the owner of CEO Ceramics at a local street festival with a whole bunch of vendors. When I see vendors who make things, I obviously, given what I do professionally, I go up and I talk to them and I ask them about what they do. So CEO Ceramics is a great business, and CEO was a vendor at this market. If I had just walked by them at the market, I would have assumed, oh, they're probably a part-time business. They're just popping up at this market. You know, I don't know anything about them, but of course I go talk to them and I find out that they have a retail storefront in Washington, D.C. nearby. And it's in fact a micro retail space. When I talk about micro retail, it's something under 1,000 square feet. This space is about 400, 500 square feet. And they can do the production of their ceramic product and their retail storefront in this same space. So it's a small amount of production and a small amount of retail in a small space, which makes it much lower risk for a young business to be able to go into a storefront. And the reason this works is because they are not just dependent on the storefront for their, they go to do markets like the one that I was at, but they also sell online direct to consumers, and they sell wholesale, which means that they're selling bulk product to other retailers in different parts of the country. So all of a sudden we're looking at a business that is in a storefront, is doing retail sales on site, is getting more revenue from being a vendor at some festivals, larger festivals, is selling also online direct to consumer, and is doing wholesale. So they have this diversity of revenues coming into this one space that makes this all possible. And they can survive no matter if that storefront is open or closed or whatever disaster hits, because they're online and in person. So this diversity of ways of reaching them makes the business much more disaster proof. I'll give you another one. This is called Woodhaven Custom Calls. They're in a small town of 5,000 people in Heflin, Alabama. This is not retail. This is a workshop. They employ a few dozen people, and they make custom wood turkey calls. When I first met them, referred to them as turkey whistles. I don't recommend you do that. They laugh at you if you do that. But these are called turkey calls, and they sell all over the country, both direct to consumers on their website, but also their products are carried wholesale in other places. When I met them, when I was doing my work with Heflin, Alabama, one of the things that they said that happened during the pandemic when everything was closed is that there was so much outdoor recreation tourism that they ended up having people show up at their workshop and want to buy things there in person and want to be able to see the production space because it was an experience. It was part of their vacation wherever they were going. And so they were now thinking of creating a small storefront, you know, with a glass partition between a small retail storefront and their production space so that people could come and have this experience. We know that people are craving experiences. They were craving it before the pandemic. And I think even more so, people are craving it now. And so this business was just a couple blocks off their small main street. They had a 4-block main street, and this was a block or two off. And so they could really be a draw to help bring people into town, which the main street could then leverage. Another kind of space for small scale manufacturers is commercial shared kitchens. Commercial shared kitchens are where different food producers, maybe who originally produced at home, but want to be able to scale their production and be in different kind of markets, need a health stamp on the space that they're doing production. It all depends on local rules around that. But commercial kitchens means that a business can come and pay for use of the kitchen or a part of the kitchen for a certain number of hours or membership. And it really lowers the barrier for food products to be able to not only launch, but also scale. And this is Mess Hall, which is a commercial kitchen that also does training and does competitions and hosts events. And so they have created this space that does all sorts of different kinds of things. And then the last kind of combination I want to show you is a shared building. So this is an old industrial building in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. This is a place called Vacant Studio. They have renovated this building and sold it for a whole bunch of small product businesses to be in this space. maybe not 500 square feet, but 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000 square feet, and they can all be in this building because it's all being used really as a co-work for small scale manufacturing. It doesn't need to be a building this big. This one's, I think, 120,000 square feet, but you could do this in a 10,000 square foot building. You could even do this in a 5,000 square foot building, and be subdividing it for different kinds of users. So that's just sort of a brief overview of what these kinds of businesses and what these kinds of spaces can mean, or what they can look like. And to me, it all comes together when we're looking at how using this to build a strong and inclusive economy and to have that thriving downtown. And that it really means that we need to invest in a better way. We need to really look at our growth in a different way, and we need to act with intention and purpose. And I talk about intention and purpose because I believe we need to make sure that we're being inclusive of people and places that were maybe excluded in the past or didn't benefit from investments in the past. And that might be visible minorities and inequities that they have faced, but that also might be place inequities, communities that have been left behind, places that haven't seen investment in a long time. And that really we can create a place that people love and that draws in others, right? Because when we take care of our own businesses and help them thrive, word gets out, and then we can attract other people to our community as well. So the way we get there, and this is all detailed in the book, is it's about really investing in the people who live there, investing in the place with those people. So it's the businesses and the people who own those businesses, it's the places, the real estate that they need to go into a downtown, but it's also creating the structure to support and scale that. And often that means the capital, the investment behind them. And then finally, it's about thinking long-term, but acting now. What can we do in the next 6 months to a year to really make a big difference in people's lives, to make a difference for these small business owners, to make a difference in the buildings on our main street? So the small scale manufacturers are everywhere, right? There are these hidden gems. And it's really important to know that there are people, they might be making their product at home, in their garage, in a shed, in their basement, right? They might be in a small industrial space tucked away somewhere. But there are people who make things in every size community, and they create all sorts of benefits for our community. So we can invest in businesses that help more people build their household wealth, which is really essential moving forward. They let us build a more inclusive opportunity to bring wealth into the community, right? I talked about how these businesses sell online. So that means they're selling to the region, they might be selling across the country, and they're not just dependent on the incomes and the revenues that they can get from people within their community. And as I said, these businesses can fill storefronts because they're selling in person and online. They're not dependent on the foot traffic of who's there today, but they can be that draw to create the experience as well. And then they help our places break out of these cycles of loss and exclusion and really grow property values because they're filling spaces. This is Zeke's Coffee. It's a coffee roaster. In the front, they have a coffee shop where you can walk in and get your cup of coffee and continue on your way. And in the back, they have a coffee roaster, and they do wholesale to the entire region out their back door of this building. And so it's just another one of the same kind of models. And they fill this vacant building with their business. And by creating that draw, helping create the foot traffic, they then helped create the draw to fill a whole bunch of other empty storefronts along the same block. So, and then the other thing to think about is that, as I mentioned, when we attract more business owners who want to be a part of what we're building, that happens because they see that we're taking care of our businesses, that we're proud of what we're building, that we're proud of who we're supporting and the places that we're creating. So all of these are pieces of the thriving economy. All of these make a really big difference in what we're looking at. And we want to figure out how to get there. And so, one community that I worked with really was sort of excited, I think most excited that they were all there, right? There was this hidden economy that was already chugging along, that they just had to figure out how to pull out of the shadows and into the showcase, so that they could bring them into the energy that they were creating in this area. So one of the things that we found when we did the work there was it was about we found a whole bunch of food producers that were doing work at home, and we found a partner on that corridor that we were looking in this community that was a university that had an old commercial kitchen. And so very quickly we could be impatient and act in the short term within the year Actually, it was right when COVID hit. So within the year and a half, they opened up a commercial shared kitchen because there was an existing space that just needed some improvements to it. And the other thing that they did as their top priority was change the zoning so that they could, they didn't have the barrier. If businesses wanted to move into this area, at least they didn't have a barrier when they went to get their occupancy permit and move into the area. And I think we have this unique moment right now, right? Because there's emergency funding in different places in different ways. There's a big recognition that downtowns were bringing people together during the pandemic. And not only that, but that they do help us attract entrepreneurs. People are looking for energized places to live where they can be a part of something. And this broader understanding through all of it that if our small businesses fail, we all fail. And the sort of the outcry from last year about small businesses, which honestly, it scares me a little bit how little is being talked about right now, but the energy and the intention, I believe, is still there. And we have this unique moment to really leverage that and grow all of those pieces. So it's about making things happen. So here's 5 things. Before I get to the 5 things, if you are interested in the book, as Margot said, she's going to be giving away copies, but you can also get the first chapter for free at recastyourcity.com. This is the bright yellow book cover that I love, and it's been really exciting to share this. The book is a DIY. It is all about how you do this yourself. It comes with worksheets, and I hope it helps you with the work that you're doing in your community, because it really is about taking action and creating great places with our small businesses. So 5 things you can do. Create affordable space for a diversity of small businesses. Diversity by business type, by business size, by business owner, by all of the different ways we can look at it. I think we have to be purposeful about who gets storefronts on our main streets, and really work purposefully to make sure that reflects the diversity of who we are, and create spaces that might be micro retail, might be bigger, but it meets the producers where they are in terms of what they need. Second, we need to be able to fill the gap in business assistance with local, and that might be small business assistance in different languages. That might be working with new partners like faith organizations or cultural groups to share information. And that also means focusing on existing businesses and helping them scale, maybe before we look at startups. Startups, people who have an idea for a business but haven't started, are very high risk. They don't have proof of concept. They don't have product market fit. They don't know what their pricing is. They're worthy of attention, but maybe as a second round. And I always start with finding out who's selling products now, even part-time. They're figuring out a part of the business, and they're more likely to be successful to help them scale than somebody who isn't started yet and just has an idea. Third is to grow targeted investment models. That's going to be different in different places, but businesses need small business loans, maybe micro grants to help folks who may be low income get started if they need raw supplies to get their business started. And really thinking about the public good behind helping more small businesses get off the ground. And then, yes, it is about our policies. It could be about your zoning. It could be about what it means to get a permit to move into a space. It could be about enforcement. So if you have a lot of vacant storefronts that are falling apart, but nobody is enforcing a policy that you have on the books that says people aren't allowed to just neglect their property, just enforcing those existing policies could make a really big difference in getting those properties into the right hands of people who will take care of them. And then building pride, right? There's so much we can do with the programming. There's so much we can do to bring people together outdoors and safely, even in the cold, that I think it's really important to think about what are we doing? Because when we bring these vendors, right, when we have these street festivals, big or small, we're showcasing what's important about us. We're showcasing the producers in our community. We're showcasing these small business owners, and we're giving people a chance to come together, feel included, have a place to gather, but also be really proud of what they're a part of within the community. So if you're ready to act, like I said, I invite you to get the first chapter at recastyourcity.com, but I also invite you to come connect with me on LinkedIn. When I see great stuff happening in other parts of the world or in other parts of the countries, this is where I share what I see, and that's sort of where I live. So I do hope all of you think about what action you can take coming out of this, because to me, it is really about how we're bringing people together, how we're creating these places that people are proud of, how we're supporting business owners who are proud to not only be creating a product, but proud of being able to provide good paying jobs. Oh, and at least in the US, these businesses are creating jobs that are paying 50 to 100% more than retail or service jobs. So it really is a way for us to pull people out of poverty, create more middle income jobs, and just grow our community, and really be a part of these spaces that are both production and retail, and that really bring the community together. And it does take leadership. It takes political leadership. It takes political will. It takes buy-in, and we have to build all of that. But it's all absolutely possible, and we can bring people together to save the hearts of our communities. It's definitely worth it. So with that, you can find lots more about us at our business website, which is Recast City. But as I said, you can get the chapter or connect on LinkedIn, or always reach out to me directly. And with that, I'm going to hand everything over to Margot.
Thanks, Ilana. Everybody, make sure you get your questions into the Q&A if you're not familiar with how the Teams event is set up. Right at the top of your screen, just a little bit to the left of where the leave button is, there's two cartoon type bubbles. If you hover over it, it says Q&A. Please get your questions in there so that we can try and get as many of them answered as we can. So I'm sitting, for those of you that don't know, at the corner of 10th and Rosser in the Chamber of Commerce building. And I see Emeka on the line, so I'm going to call you out, Emeka, because I think this is your home turf. He's the Downtown Development Corporation Executive Director, and I think we've got the starting point of exactly what you're talking about here. So we're in a city, Ilana, of about 50,000 people. It is within eyesight of my building. We have Charleston and Harlow, who you may know of as a candle maker, who is ships all over North America and has all sorts of celebrity notoriety. We've got a fabulous boutique bakery right next door in this same building called Chez Angela. You wander up the street a little bit, we have O&O, which is a fantastic coffee shop that's got all sorts of unique little knickknacks and so on. As you head up the block, we have an Ethiopian restaurant, we have a brew house, there is a business development center on the corner of 10th and Princess, where they've got a local community futures organization which does funding and business development support. They have an entrepreneur center. My office is right there. You go a few blocks further down to the east, you've got BNRC, which has a makerspace all set up. So we've got a lot of bones right here in Brandon, and as I think around elsewhere in the province, we've got community kitchens that are there to help our food processors. I know that there's other maker spaces out there. I know that the community futures have a great network to be able to do this. So we're not starting from nothing, and I think there's a lot of great resources there. So I have a question here then about the ownership models of some of these spaces as we look at developing them going forward to fill in those gaps. Are they municipal? Are they cooperative? Are they private? What sort of models are you seeing?
All of the above. It's a great question. So when we think about it from a real estate side, the model I showed you that was the multi-floor industrial building, that's private sector. That's a private sector developer who is invested in that building. He actually has 2 buildings like that, maybe 3 now, in this neighborhood, and really figured out how to do this, and is in fact working with institutional investors who are doing it a little bit mission driven. They take a lower rate of return and are investing in this neighborhood. So in many ways, working almost like a community development corporation. I don't know if you have an equivalent of that, a nonprofit in the community, but he is for profit. We also have community development corporations do this as well. So doing it from the nonprofit real estate developer perspective. And in other communities, there's a community in California named Bellflower. That's a smaller town in LA County, but nothing like LA, that the municipality is buying property. They know that they're There are some key properties in town that they want to make sure either ends up in the hands of somebody who's going to really take care of it and get good businesses into the ground floor. But also they know that as they're working on their redevelopment, the property values and the price of space might really go up a lot. And they want to make sure that they're retaining affordable space long term, particularly for micro enterprise businesses, for really small businesses that might not be able to afford their own space. There's a great example in Ithaca, New York, of somebody who bought, it was the old newspaper printing building that was a block off of Main Street. And he renovated the space so that there's a maker space in the basement. On the ground floor, there's an alleyway facing side of the building, and he created a whole bunch of very micro retail spaces, like 300 square feet. I'm sorry, I'm not doing it in meters. And then has other users in other parts of the buildings. But what he's found is that the micro retail spaces are in such high demand and actually turn over very little, because he's actually making a higher amount per square foot on that space, because people are looking at it as a flat fee. So for their storefront, they're not thinking about, I'm paying X per square foot for the storefront because it's small. And so it really does work in many cases from the private sector perspective. But I believe that affordable space in a state of good repair is a public good, and that it is very worthwhile for municipalities to also be investing in space like this. And sometimes that means proof of concept, right? If nobody's ever done it in the community, having a CDC or a municipality do a project and really do all of the groundwork, figure out who is this pipeline, who are these business owners, how do we bring them together, how do we connect them up with the property owners, is an important first step.
Excellent. One of the things I had noticed in your book was the conversation around vacant spaces and how much it actually costs. And I think there's a lot of communities that have challenges with vacant space. What sort of incentives have you seen that help people address that and reducing those vacant buildings? And one specific question in the queue is, does an empty building tax work?
Oh, I love the empty building tax. That was a great question. So there are a few communities that have, it's named all different things. I call it a vacant property ordinance. And it says that if you are leaving your building more or less neglected and empty for more than 6 months, that you have to pay a fee that is related to your property value. And it's high enough that it reduces the incentive to leave something vacant, because there are a lot of people who look at all of the work that has to do with management and rehab, and they feel like it's just not worth it, when in fact, they're creating a negative impact on everybody else around them. It's not just for the community that one building is lost, it's that a whole bunch of other impacts are happening around that. And it really creates this negative feedback loop that I'm sure many, many people are very familiar with. And so a vacant property ordinance or an empty building tax, I think I think it's actually a responsibility that we have to the community to pass ordinances like that. The flip of it is financial incentives. So there are some communities that have matching grants for facade improvements. There's another community that uses local dollars to match. They had a lot of service businesses on the ground floor, and they wanted to turn them back to some kind of retail and production uses. And so they had a matching grant program to help with the renovation of the build out of the ground floor. The property owner needed to have a signed lease with a business to prove that somebody was moving in who was an active retail use. But then the jurisdiction, the municipality, would match the cost of building out that space up to a certain amount. So I think those kinds of matching programs can be really effective. There's another program, it's actually in Washington, D.C., called the Great Streets Program, where they said, we will invest directly in with the business who's occupying the space on certain corridors. So if it's a small town and with a main street, or if it's a bigger city like what you're in that has a couple of main streets that are really important, being able to say that, we really want to invest in small businesses being in the storefronts on doors for various reasons. And so the businesses can apply directly for grants that support them in those corridors as well.
Fantastic. I'm going to shift a little bit to housing and the impact on housing on some of these conversations. And I'm going to sort of put two questions out there for you to consider. I was on a call this morning where there was a lot of conversation about housing issues, and I know in your, my first question is, in your book you make reference to a program, and I should have made a notice to where it was, but I'm sure you'll remember, where the city was working with properties that were on tax liens and how they could be recovered, and they partnered with Habitat for Humanity to create affordable housing. How did that program work? And do you have similar ones that you could reference?
So Habitat for Humanity has done wonderful work here on that. That project that you're referring to is in Lafayette, Louisiana. So the neighborhood is the historically Black neighborhood in Lafayette. Their neighborhood leadership partnered with Habitat to get control over properties that had, never had stopped paying taxes a long time ago, were under city control, and Habitat for Humanity could then, for a very small amount and the commitment to invest a fair amount of money in these properties, renovate them. And they renovated them to stay small houses that fit the fabric of the neighborhood and were affordable through the Habitat model to people who lived in the neighborhood or who wanted to own a house in the neighborhood. And the thing that was really exciting to me about that partnership, though, was also that they wanted to figure out how to take that model over to commercial, so that in their old Main Street of this neighborhood that has been neglected for a long time, how could we help them get control over an old commercial property and do the same thing? One of the things that they were working on before I ever met them was something they called it the community house, which was buying an old house in the center of the neighborhood and renovating it to be really like a community center where the kids could go to do homework after school. They were creating a business academy for people in the neighborhood to really make sure that they had their business 101 straight for growing their own businesses. And then our push was really to figure out how to convert that into the storefronts that were nearby. The work that Habitat does is a model that they've replicated all over the United States. And their whole goal is about creating incremental, affordable units, really one by one. A lot of times there's incremental development that's really the question of what's the cost of getting a loan. Especially in markets that haven't seen a lot of investment for a long time. It's very hard to get a bank loan to do any kind of redevelopment or commercial investment. And so sometimes that might be a municipality or a larger entity coming in to provide a loan guarantee, or providing some kind of low-cost loan to help make the project pencil. It's the other way to think about it. Or sometimes it's just a grant. If it's a public good and it's important, putting the money in and really looking at the numbers to see what is that gap. What are we missing to make this project work?
So you sort of implied in there that along with this, there's often lots of social issues and subsidized housing and those sorts of things that can really impact on the median income of a neighborhood, which in turn then can impact on developers and all of those other sorts of things. So thank you for already addressing the question that is on the screen. And so if further clarification is needed, then Emeka, you can just send me another question and I can get that in place. I was really interested by the concept of maker councils. And I've been in some conversations recently around rural innovation councils and how they might be able to play a role in supporting people in this area. Can you talk a little bit more about what's happening in Knoxville?
Sure. So Knoxville, now many years ago, my guess is certainly more than 5, because I worked with them 5 years ago, maybe 7 years. Etsy, the company where you can sell your crafts online, your artisan products online, and many other things now, decided that they really wanted to get mayors to make commitments around supporting this maker sector. The craft entrepreneurship is what they called it. I think they still do. And they convened a whole bunch of mayors across the country to say, what kind of commitment can you make to this? And here are a bunch of ideas. And the mayor at the time, Mayor Harrow of Knoxville, came back and committed to creating something called a Mayor's Maker Council. We have councils to advise elected officials on all sorts of stuff, right? Public safety, employment. So Mayor Harrow, she created this Mayor's Maker Council. And what it was is the intention was to convene business owners who create any kind of product, right? All small scale manufacturing, to come together and to be able to provide feedback about some of the decisions or some of the ideas going on at the city level to make sure that it at minimum didn't hurt that business sector, but ideally would support that sector. And the Mayor's Maker Council was staffed by the folks at the Knoxville Entrepreneur Center, who up until that point had been doing a lot of focus on tech business development. But with this program really started for the first time focusing on product businesses and the entrepreneurship around product businesses. And what grew out of that was this recognition that there are in fact a lot of these businesses in the community. People were selected for a 2-year term on the council. Over time, they really worked very purposefully to make sure that that council represented the diversity of individuals in the city. The Knoxville Entrepreneur Center started hosting online programming, training for startup businesses in products, training for advanced businesses, really expanding their distribution in e-commerce. They launched a partnership with the Knoxville Urban League, which had already been bringing together predominantly Black-owned businesses, and really have created this, in many ways, created this brand for the city that is around this business sector. So much so that I can tell you, Knoxville is more or less is closest to the East Coast of the U.S. Up and down the East Coast of the U.S., people know that Knoxville is a place to go as a producer of goods, and so they've really done a phenomenal branding themselves, but actually providing a whole bunch of services and support, both political support for it, but also entrepreneurship and business development training as well. They have a website called The Maker City. I have one of their t-shirts that is the destination for all of these businesses. And they created an amazing online directory of these businesses too. So anybody can come and find them and sort of explore what's going on in Knoxville. So the Mayor's Maker Council was the first step in all of that.
I've got another question here from Charlene. She really loves the authentic images in the presentation and comments that sometimes there's a disconnect within smaller communities and local government about their role in promoting a positive and open spot for business. And a culture to really embrace these ideas, which is interesting, Charlene, because I had made a comment somewhere in here about the art of managing up, because many people on this call are in a position where they're having to manage messages up to council and similar sorts of bodies. So what are some strategies that can help build some of this awareness? And how do you manage up to council? I know we've got at least one counselor on the call here, so.
No, it's an important question. I mean, and it's why we focus on our short-term wins, right? I mean, part of what we do is we go out and we find and we help communities themselves find small-scale manufacturing businesses because we want their voice, right? We want to know what they need. We want to know what works for them, and then we want to be able to share that with elected officials or with folks who are influential in making decisions within the community and economic development or real estate. So we have to go to the source. We have to make sure that we can echo and share the needs and this business sector that honestly has never had a seat at the table. Nobody even knows they're there in most places, except for places that have done a little bit of this work, but mostly still have never really reflected the voice of the individual businesses. So we find them when we talk to them. The second part of it is these wins. So when we talk to them and we figure out what the gaps are or what are the assets that we can build on, we really think about what can we do for them in the next 6 months that's visible, that makes a big difference for them, that makes a big difference for the community, and focus on those things first, because there's always going to be really big, hard things that might take us 3, 5, 10 years to do. We can't wait for those things. The need right now in small businesses and vacant properties is so overwhelmingly huge that we have to find ways to help right now. And so when we create those short-term wins, it also creates an opportunity for elected officials to say, here's a win, to have the community come together and feel like they are a part of a win. And then the third thing is the communication side of it. So we always talk to folks about the social media side. You have to show the sausage making process. And I know that's really hard for a lot of folks to do, but to really be conversational about this, to really create an online place where some of these business owners can come together and others can see it, but also to tell the story of these businesses. There's a guy, I keep talking about him. There's a person out of Michigan who is doing storytelling of business owners in first person. I don't know if anybody on social media follows Humans of New York, right? Where they tell the story of a person and the story is told in the I perspective, right? From this person's perspective. And that's what this guy does with business owners in downtowns. He does an interview and he takes pictures of them staring at the camera, right? It is eye to eye. And he uses social media as a share their story from an I statement, from a first person storytelling perspective. And it's incredibly powerful when we tell the personal story or the people story of our business owners and of our downtowns and of the people who are there. We want people to have an emotional connection to the places, and it can make a really big difference when we can communicate that widely.
It's interesting that you mentioned the I perspective on things, because we just had Small Business Week in Canada a couple of weeks ago, middle of October, and we launched, as the Rural Manitoba Economic Development Corporations, our first 2 business profiles, and they were done from an I perspective, where we went out and we talked to business owners, and we did 2 profiles where they were talking about their business and what it meant, and challenges of working in rural Manitoba and the successes around working in rural Manitoba, and all of those sorts of things. And it's one of the things I'm most excited about in this new role of mine with this new agency that we're building and growing, is being able to tell some of those stories. So right. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here, but I'm going to take the opportunity to just let people know that are on the call that one of the first things we'll be tasking the marketing and communications person that I'm in the process of recruiting for is looking for those kinds of stories, so we can get out and start telling them on behalf of rural Manitoba, because there's so many fantastic success stories out there.
Yeah. And the other thing to think about in all of that, I would just add, is the training. And we know that a lot of places have different kinds of small business training, but the training, the business development training that you need for product businesses is going to be different. It's about pricing things right. It's about e-commerce. It's about distribution. There's a lot of different challenges that a product businesses have, let alone supply chain challenges that folks are facing right now. And so really thinking about, as you go out and talk to small scale manufacturers, what is that gap? Is there a gap in knowledge? Is there a gap in mentors? There's an amazing person in Chicago, a business called 37 Oaks, that provides this kind of training, and, really thinking about, are there people in the community who can do this? Do we need access to some kind of training online like that? Because we know that businesses that have strong mentors, at least in the tech sector, are twice as likely to succeed. And so I would wonder, I assume it's going to be pretty much the same in small scale manufacturing. So having that kind of access to mentors makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's fantastic. And really good advice. And I know as we build out our programming at RMED, we're looking to people like those on the call and yourself to be able to help us figure out what are the opportunities in the places where there are gaps, where other people have seen success in the kinds of programs and services that they deliver, the incentives, the grants, the tax breaks, all of those kinds of things, so that we can figure out how to bring those things into rural Manitoba for success. One last question, and then we'll wrap things up here. In the book, you talk about when you find your Main Street project, and this applies probably more so to larger centers than it does smaller, that often comes with having to say no to other things. We can't spread ourselves too thin. How have you found communication around that to be really effective, to help people understand that it's okay that it's not my street today, because it'll be my turn in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, and it's all about scheduling. It's not about saying no.
Yeah, I think it's a really tough question because there's plenty of examples in a lot of communities where you never get to that next street, right? And so there's a huge trust element involved in that. And I think a lot of times it's much more about building trust across neighborhoods or across individuals more than anything else. And trust is hard to come by in a lot of communities right now. I think one of the ways we talk about it is that we think that this location is the best opportunity for this kind of business right now. And we want to make sure that we're getting it right in this place. And then we can put it in other places. Although the truth is that sometimes when we work with other communities, we find that there are certain kinds of product businesses that might work really well here, but there might be a second place that we want to really be thinking about sending people towards also. We have to create these great places with a lot of energy. We have to have we have to hit that critical mass of people and create that critical mass of energy coming together. So that becomes really important as a part of that as well.
Well, there has certainly been lots of great advice, and we've got about 4 minutes before this wraps up. So I'm going to give everybody sort of one last chance to get your questions in. If we don't get to whatever last ones trickle in, then we will reach out and try and get some answers for you in the next day or two. This has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much, Ilana, for joining us. I'd like to pose a few challenges to the people that are on the call. This is just the beginning of a conversation, and I think there's opportunities for communities to come together where there is a similar approach and there's a similar philosophy to think about how we can each develop our own little section of Main Street, support each other in that process, support each other in our own journeys, but also to take a look at how we can leverage that from a regional perspective as well. Because when one community thrives, the ones around it thrive, and together we can make entire regions thrive. And so I think it's an exciting opportunity to be able to take a look at these sorts of things and figure it out. I know that Ilana has a program that she has not mentioned where there are opportunities to work directly with her in cohorts. She and I have been talking about that a little bit. How it may or may not work in Manitoba from a local perspective or from a regional perspective. So I'd be really interested in getting some feedback from people on that. And if there are communities that are interested in this approach in a much more structured, formal and official way, then we can certainly make connections and see what that means in order to be able to help people support each other. One last question before we let people go from Thomas. Thanks, Thomas. Local councils and rural communities struggle to make a balanced budget each year, and it seems hard for local leaders to invest in vacant properties and develop business support projects that extend over more than 1 year. Yeah, that multi-year funding piece is always a challenge. What do you suggest is a fair timeline for downtown revitalization projects? 2 years, 3 years? That's an impossible question, Thomas, but I'm going to finish what you've written here for her, because it seems like real leaders are often reluctant to invest in something that doesn't have sort of that 1 year time frame. So, suggestions on
1 year time frame. So I think the is always what are your goals, right? And the goal long term might be filling space in storefronts, but you might find that the short-term goal is that we need to train 15 business owners in product business development, or we need to convene 5 events or event every month that brings our small business owners together in downtown. There might be these increments you need to get to before you are ready to invest in the real estate. Real estate sometimes is a really scrungy thing. And so I do think that if you're investing in a property yourself, or you're partnering with a private sector developer, there has to be commitments and benchmarks and, what is the delivery timeline, because you can't have people taking advantage of your funding. There's definitely programs in other cities where you get a private sector person might get a property that the city is in control of for a very low cost, but they have to contractually commit to investing a certain amount of money and getting it open within the year, right? But then you have to have the follow through for the enforcement, or it means that you're not investing your own money, but you're investing the staff time to help figure out the financing for the private sector. So I always look at what are those interim goals, what are those short-term wins that you can create, because the real estate one might be a bigger, harder one. and that you might have to build towards that. That being said, I also say we have to find the believers. So if you have property owners who are all in and want to make this happen, then the question is, how do you make it the easiest thing possible within your local decision making for that person to do the thing that you want them to be able to do? We want to smooth all of the process, maybe streamline the approval process for the projects that we really want to happen. So there's a lot of different pieces of that, but I understand the challenge.
Yeah, there certainly is. Okay, well, thank you again for your time, your wisdom, your insights, and lots of really creative examples that we can take back into our communities for more conversation. Again, people on the call can reach out to RMED at any point in time, and we'll help facilitate connections where there's common interests, and we'll see whether or not there's opportunities for us to support each other through these journeys. Ilana, I'm sure we will be talking again. Reach out at any point in time. And everybody have a fantastic afternoon. Enjoy this great sunshine. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.